SEP Fanfic Readings presents Measure of a Man by Days 22. Chapter 2. Pay It Forward. March 16th, 2011. Hermione's father was a quiet, pragmatic man. His love of whiskey, jazz music, and painting were quite out of character for his conservative nature. Before a Hogwarts representative had given Hermione the letter that would alter the course of her life, she spent her early evenings watching her dad work on his labor of love, his craft. When they arrived home after her parents finished at the office, he would change into dungarees, pour himself a finger of whiskey, and retreat to his art room while her mom prepared dinner for her Julia Child's cookbook, substituting ingredients she couldn't be bothered with. Her phone was always pressed to her ear as she chatted away with friends near and far. Her laughter shook the spiraled phone cord that stretched across the kitchen. Hermione, who spent her afternoons after school completing assignments in her parents' dental practice while the receptionist looked on and praised her brilliance, would change into comfortable clothes and sit with her feet tucked under her in the armchair, always with a book of some sort. Her dad would ask about her day as it pertained to her grades and assignments, and let her prattle on while he prepared his paints and provided the appropriate feedback. Hermione knew that conversation was over when he sipped his drink for the first time, turned on the old record player he'd had since university, and picked up his brush to work on his latest creation. Her father had never taken a single lesson, and it showed. His work was terrible, but he never cared, and neither did she. What kept Hermione coming back was something that happened at the strangest of times. It had nothing to do with the whiskey. She wasn't old enough to drink it anyway. Nothing to do with the music. She didn't like jazz in the same way she didn't like Celestina Warbeck. As a child, Hermione found the music old, incomprehensible, and not so melodic. And she wasn't a skilled painter, but sometimes, when her dad was absorbed in the murky undertones of a piano as the saxophone and singer soothed his soul, sipping that glass of amber liquor, he would make broad strokes with his paintbrush and talk. Not about anything in particular, just whatever came to mind. Unless a football game was on, her dad was a quiet and thoughtful man, not social by any means, with only a few close friends. Always thinking and enjoying the quiet in his own mind until he was ready to interact with the rest of the world. It was difficult to get to know him. So, it was the little moments of openness that stuck with Hermione over the years. She kept them in her heart and leveraged them as part of her determined efforts during the long Horcrux hunt. It was also in those moments when she felt like she knew her dad best. He mostly gave advice about life. Stay true to yourself, don't ever stop learning and growing. Things she would remember for years. Create certainty, but leave room for unexpected. He told stories she'd never heard about her grandparents who had died before she was born. You have my mother's hair and my father's spirit. He told her stories about her mom and stories about while they were dating. Your mother sat next to me in school and talked incessantly. I only kissed her the first time to shut her up. He sometimes told her stories of herself from before she could remember. When you were upset, all the cabinet doors would open and shut. I think we knew then that you were special. But on the very rare occasions, he talked about nothing that ended up being something. Love is never what we expect it to be. She remembered it from one day during summer holiday, while Billie Holiday played on the record player. It's bizarre, enigmatic, and doesn't make sense to anyone. Why do you think so many people write songs on the subject? Change their lives for it. Now that her parents were retired, and their lucrative practice was sold, her dad still painted and listened to jazz on the same record player when they weren't traveling. But he no longer showed bits of himself to her, no longer told her stories, not like he once had. It was yet another thing that time and the ever-growing distance between Hermione and her parents had changed. But his silence hadn't stopped her from sitting with him during her visits, hadn't stopped her from watching him like she once had, with a book on her lap as she listened to the music she still didn't care for as an adult. It didn't stop her from waiting for another opportunity to see him. Her father's skills had improved greatly now that he had more time to devote to his craft, and had actually begun taking classes. His style was a clean mix of abstract, geometric, layered designs that he'd just started showing their friends instead of binning. He'd even sold one or two. He'd never offered one of his paintings, and she never asked. Just like all the others, the painting session that day ended with her mother calling them for dinner. Hermione ate with them once every few weeks in an attempt to keep her family from completely crumbling at her feet. She spent her time inwardly cringing from the tense smiles aimed at her, wondering just how they'd gotten to that point. Well, actually, she knew. It started when she returned their memories and tearfully tried to explain everything, including why they were in Australia of all places. While they understood the reason for the choice she made and forgave her, they chose to stay in Australia. Their only form of communication was monthly phone calls, where they would politely ask her to visit and Hermione would decline. She knew they didn't mean it. They did, however, return 6 years ago to help her sort through her own crisis, but the damage had long since been done. The divide between them was too great. Still, Hermione was diligent and kept trying, carrying the hope that one day she would finish construction on that bridge that would close the distance between them. Until then, Hermione joined her parents for a meal of roasted chicken and boiled cabbage that she'd grown in her garden. Most of the time, her mother wasn't the best cook. She hated following recipes and sometimes left out vital ingredients. Sometimes her alterations worked, but often, like tonight, they didn't. Her dad was used to it. His palate had adjusted over the years, so he ate his dry chicken and overcooked cabbage without complaint. Hermione followed suit like a dutiful daughter, but made sure to leave plenty of room for dessert. That was where her mother excelled, and Hermione was keen on her bread and butter pudding. "Next time you come for dinner," her mother said as they ate, "make sure you pick a day when Ron can come with you. He's such a sweet young man, and quite amusing." She chuckled in a motherly sort of way that reminded her of Mrs. Weasley when she was thinking about something pleasant. "I think he loves my desserts just as much as you." And that was the subject of their biggest disagreement to date. "Mom," Hermione groaned while cutting into her chicken, "we're just friends." And that was all they would ever be. She and Ron had reached the point where they had been apart longer than they had been together, yet her mother still hadn't let it go. In truth, neither had Ron, which complicated matters further as their lives were heavily entwined. He was her best friend, his family was like her own, and therefore he would always be an important part of her life, just not in the way he wanted. It had taken 3 years for Hermione to realize that, in addition to the fact that they weren't well-suited and had wildly different interests and opinions on basically everything. Ron wanted her in a box that she couldn't fit in, a box where he would have to take out the parts that he loved most about her and leave the rest. He was traditional. He wanted her to take on those roles that she had no interest in. And she wanted a partner, not a project. Hermione grew tired of apologizing for who she was and stifling herself to avoid arguments. Even with the knowledge that no relationship was perfect, Hermione had a nagging feeling that she was settling rather than compromising, and it ate at her. It ate at her until she stopped trying to force herself to fight for something that she didn't actually want in the end. "I know, but he was so good for you." Hermione didn't agree. When she glanced over at her father, who continued chewing while pretending to be engaged, she swore she saw just the hint of his disagreement, too. It was hard to tell, but for the purpose of her ongoing efforts to keep the peace, Hermione changed the subject. "How was Morocco?" She continued eating as she listened to her mother tell stories of their trip while her father provided the occasional comment that usually involved correcting her mild exaggerations, with a fond look on his face. It was her mother's way, after all. Her mother had always been sharp and lively, even more so now that she was older. She talked with her hands, and though she appeared wrapped up in her stories, her mother always kept an eye out for their reactions. "We're going to Greece in early June. We're going to stay by the water." They traveled a lot now that they had time and financial freedom. They always went somewhere warm by the water because years in Australia had spoiled them for it. "That sounds lovely." Her mom served her dad another helping of chicken. "When was the last time you took a vacation?" Hermione scratched her temple with the nail of her forefinger. "I went to Madrid with a few friends." "Over 3 years ago, before Ginny was too far along with Lily to travel." "That's nice," her father nodded as he took a drink of water. "Traveling is good for your health." And he left it at that. Dinner progressed, and Hermione forced a smile in their stilted attempts at making conversation, not knowing what they could discuss and what had been deemed off limits. It felt like she was sharing a meal with strangers, chatting about bland, predictable topics like the weather, her mum's wine-tasting event with her friends the next day, her dad's growing interest in bird-watching, and Hermione's plans for expanding a garden her parents still hadn't been to her house to see. And though she hated the distance, it was better than the alternative of not seeing them at all. At least, that was what she told herself as she grinned and bore the awkwardness, all while knowing and accepting her own fault in the breakdown. As the only witch in their family, her parents had always had a certain level of trust in her, trust that she wouldn't use magic to cheat the system, to solve every little problem, or hurt those with no way to fight back, no matter if that pain was caused by her wand or her actions. And she had irreparably broken that trust when she'd altered their memories. They had forgiven her, but therapy had taught her that forgiveness wasn't the end of the process. It was the beginning of a new relationship, which continued to be shaped by the very actions that had needed forgiving in the first place. Whenever she got subtle hints of their wariness, it was a harsh reminder of the road that she was on towards reconciliation. Humility was something she was still working on, and not letting her own guilt blind her to the progress she had made. Sometimes, when it returned with a vengeance, all Hermione could think about was how they'd never gotten back to where they once were. How it would always be a terrible thing between them, like a bacterium infecting their plants that only made its presence known with yellowing leaves and wilt. But then she had to remind herself what she did when that happened, the extra care she had to take with each plant, the work she had to put in, and how in the end her garden was healthier for it, more resilient. She had to utilize that same care with her parents. Hermione was laying the groundwork with each dinner, each visit, and every interaction. No matter how the distance made her feel, she knew she had to be as patient with them as she was with her garden, knew that she had to keep coming for weekday dinners, keep offering yields from her garden for her mom to experiment with, and keep watching her dad paint and listen to jazz music. She had to keep the gates of communication open so they could come in, should they choose. Maybe, one day, they would come in and stay a while. Until then, she would keep working. When dinner concluded, Hermione helped her mother with the dishes while her dad wiped down the countertops and put away the extras. He finished first and gave her mom a quick kiss and Hermione a quick hug before disappearing into the sitting room to watch a bit of telly. With the sound of a football match as the background music, they worked together, Hermione washing and her mom organizing each dish in the dishwasher that she had to have, but only used it for drying. "Your dad is concerned for you," her mom said with an almost conspiratorial whisper as she regrouped the forks together. "He doesn't think it's good that you're alone so far out in the country." She furrowed her brows. Her dad? Concerned? She couldn't tell. "I like the place," Hermione shrugged. "I can flu or apparate anywhere I need to go." Her mother pulled a face, much like she always did when she used wizarding terminology. "Why can't you opt for a place closer to the city, where there are plenty of options in Surrey? You would be closer to us if anything should happen. It would ease his worries." "My vegetable patch wouldn't fit." Her parents would understand that if they visited, but she bit her tongue on the matter. Hermione lived in a cottage too large for one person on land she protected under wards. The closest wizarding town was Godric's Hollow, and it wasn't close at all. There was not a neighbor in sight. Her house had been quite dilapidated when the realtor reluctantly showed it to her, but there was charm and potential that she loved at first sight. She basically paid for the land and got the house free. The work needed was extensive. Her parents thought the purchase was foolish, as she'd just quit her job in the ministry, but Hermione converted half of her Gringotts account, with her extensive savings from years of being thrifty and leftover war compensation funds, into pounds and used it to pay off the loan and the contractors for their work. In truth, she could have done it with magic, but watching their daily progress gave her something to focus on. They tore out unseen rot and carefully carved away the original stone, rebuilding it back to the point where the outside looked the same, but the inside was all new. It was a metaphor she couldn't ignore. The vegetable patch was originally a therapy assignment she'd started not long after construction finished, to occupy her time and manage her stress. Her house was not yet furnished when Neville came by with a few young plants as a gift, and an idea was born. Pretty soon, he was coming over weekly to show her how to build garden boxes, cultivate the land, what to plant, and where to plant it. She started reading books, planning, growing. It gave her purpose. After her first harvest, she and Neville sat in the pasture past her garden and gorged themselves on unwashed tomatoes, and when she shed cathartic tears, he didn't judge her. He just let her cry and reminded her that this was the first harvest of many more to come. Hermione's house meant more to her than she could convey, and she hated that her parents didn't understand. So she kept washing dishes, forearm deep in warm, sudsy water, when her mother revisited the topic Hermione thought she had properly circumvented. "I meant what I said about Ron. You should bring him when you come next time. More than that, you should reconsider him." Just because she was trying to mend the gap didn't mean she would stifle herself on that particular topic. "You've made your opinion about that quite clear over the last 6 years. And I'll keep saying it until you listen. You won't find anyone better, not with that sort of life that you live." It wasn't said to be offensive or hurtful. It was just a fact. "Your work is very involved, Hermione. No man, wizard or not, will understand your level of commitment to your patients like he does." Hermione almost laughed, but passed over the plate she just washed instead before starting on the cups. Ron had just gotten to the point in his life where he'd found his own footing outside of his large and now distinguished family. But because he'd had to share so much of his younger years, he never liked sharing her. He was always insecure about his rank and role in her life. Now that they were broken up and he was working with George to develop new products for the ever-expanding joke shop, and now that she was no longer on track to become the youngest minister for magic, he seemed more settled around her. Not as irritated when people sought her out over him. Now that she wasn't so busy or important, Ron wanted to try again as though her schedule had been the proximate cause of their breakup from the start. It wasn't. Rather than provide her mother with a detailed character analysis on Ron, Hermione opted for a response that would throw herself into a deeper pit, but at least it would be a different one. You're right. My commitment is to my work. In fact, I'm so committed that I am not looking for anything right now. You're not getting any younger. Hermione turned her head, eyes narrowed in calculation. Her mother was just under 30 when Hermione was born. Her parents had wanted to be established in their careers first. Pot, meat, kettle. I believe you wanted to have a career first. I'm just like you in that respect. Because her mother would never admit that Hermione was right, she continued on without responding to that factual statement. While I love Harry's children, I would like to have my own grandchildren at some point. I'll have to meet the right person for that. Little did her mom know that with the way Theo was trying to convince her to take on a potential 5-year contract, that didn't seem likely. You already have. Hermione rolled her eyes. Her mother had always been very clever at guiding a conversation in the direction of her choosing. She passed her the final cup to rinse. We'll have to agree to disagree. For now. They tabled the conversation for another day, and once her mom finished arranging everything, she shut the dishwasher. Hermione drained the sink, wiping it with a dish towel until the water was completely gone. While she wrung out the wet cloth, her mother put on the electric kettle for tea. Hermione had brought ginger tea from her own collection after her mom complained of a stomach ache during their phone call last night. She went to sit at the table, and her mother joined her after drying her hands and pouring the boiling water into the teapot to steep. Tea first, dessert second. Her mother looked over her shoulder at the tea kettle before she stiffly asked, How are you? Mentally was the unspoken word at the end of her question. Trust issues aside, she was still her mother. And as a mother, by right, she was always worried. Her mom was the daughter of a doctor and a dentist herself, so while mental health wasn't exactly a taboo subject, it was one that she approached with caution. Not that it mattered. It always put Hermione on edge regardless. It was just another one of those sore topics neither of them wanted to discuss because of the bad memories that it evoked in both of them. She kept her response simple. I'm fine. You're not working too hard, are you? No, Mum. I'm currently between patients. Her last was an Auror who, thanks to experimental treatment, had been revived after being Death Eater ambushed early last year. It was a 4-month assignment where she worked one-on-one to get him not only physically and mentally healthy, but accustomed to his new normal with the family that had never given up on him. Last week, she'd transitioned him to the care of another healer who would do routine follow-ups, alerting Hermione only if needed. Good. Silence fell between them as her dad's complaints over the game filtered in from the sitting room. Arsenal must have been losing again. For a brief moment, she smirked, reminded of Ron and his love for the always-losing cannons. The kettle whistled, and when her mother went to make tea for them both, Hermione rested her hand on her arm. Let it steep longer with the ginger root, another 10 minutes or so. With a nod, her mum continued with their conversation. You're making sure you eat, right? Hermione sighed. I am. And sleeping? 8 hours a night. She paused and then said, I'm not going to fall apart, Mom. Not again. At the memory, Hermione visibly winced, instantly agitated. In truth, she didn't care for any reminder of what had happened, not that she could remember it anyway. Now she had to contend with the questions and looks, the concern and the worries, not just from her mother, but from those closest to her as well. The entire incident felt like a dream, an encounter that had happened to someone else, not her. Hermione thought she was stronger, thought she could push herself to the brink and still maintain control. She thought herself invincible when, in fact, she was only human. The lesson she had learned had been humbling. I know you won't. You've been doing well. Her mother started to reach for her hand, resting on the table, but faltered, placing her hand on top of the other. Hermione thought about completing the action and reaching for her, but hesitation was still current best friend. So she didn't. You look like you've lost weight. I haven't. Okay, but I still worry, Hermione. Frustration, mainly at herself, slipped past her lips. During a moment, she'd left herself unguarded. I'm fine, she said curtly. She regretted it when her mother's face darkened and she straightened in her chair. Immediately chastened, Hermione sighed. I'm sorry. Her mother held up a hand. I pushed too hard. It's not that, Mom, she said in barely a whisper as she looked down at the table. Thank you for your concern. Everything is fine. I'm taking care of myself. Are you still attending therapy sessions? As needed, and I haven't needed to in a while. A moment of silence passed before she nodded, accepting Hermione's answer. Then her mother's line of questioning shifted. And the threats? Because one of their terms had been full disclosure, her parents knew all about them. There was another one this past week. She didn't want to detail everything that had happened, but she knew she had to tell her mother something. It was an escalation from their normal methods. Worry etched its way across her face. And the werewolf? Should we be concerned? While Hermione had told them about Greyback and the personal threat he posed, she hadn't divulged everything, especially not about the periodic wolf howls she heard on the full moon near her home. No one knew about those. She shook the thought from her head. No, the ministry is handling it. Last I remembered, you didn't trust them. As a matter of fact, she didn't, but Hermione trusted herself and her own skills. She'd had a layer of wards over her parents' house that made it practically impenetrable, and should anything less than human manage to penetrate them, she would be alerted immediately. The same wards existed over her own home and surrounding land. It was one of the reasons she didn't worry as much as she probably should. Satisfied, her mother visibly relaxed and gave a sarcastic chuckle. Well, if anything changes and our lives are being threatened, be sure to let us know before you modify our memories. It was meant to be a joke. Hermione knew that. Just an attempt at making light of a tense situation. But damn if it didn't burn. March 18th, 2011. Brewing wolfsbane was a complicated task, both draining and tedious. The ingredients were still not cheap or easily accessible, but Hermione brewed batch after batch each month for Padma's patients, and any wolf that came into her clinic in the alternative healing department seeking the potion. Hermione had not played any part in passing the pro-werewolf laws that made it a crime to discriminate against them for any reason. However, the Wizengamot had dragged her into the spectacle when they signed it into law. Additionally, they'd invited the media and Andromeda, who had been told to bring Teddy, as the son of a werewolf, for the occasion. Like a prop, they had all been there to make the powers that be look good, and they needed her to do that. They had taken great care to make certain and spin the story to make it look as if the law had only been made possible by the efforts of the brilliant war hero, champion of the people, beast, beings alike, Hermione Granger. Despite the fact that there had been an entire team that had worked tirelessly on getting the laws passed. No, she had been the one to take the stage, front and center, and smile for the cameras. Hermione shook hands with the minister and chief warlock, Tiberius McLaggen, played her role, and pretended not to feel guilty about it. Pretended that no one sneered at her back. Not that it mattered. Laws, even ones as clear as pro-werewolf articles, were easy to circumvent with moderate effort. Not to mention, the ministry made them extremely hard to enforce. Unless explicit proof was provided, discrimination accusations were often deemed hearsay and speculation, and thus damaging to someone's reputation. It was something that kept a lot of the cases out of the ears of the Wizengamot as a whole, and in their small committees where they either settled or the case was dropped. So instead of evicting a person because of their status and registration, they could be evicted for contamination concerns, or because they didn't have a regular source of wolfsbane. Quietly, the Wizengamot hadn't passed the only beneficial aspect of the law, which would have made the ministry responsible for providing wolfsbane to all lycanthropes for free. That would have been too right, made things too easy for people treated as subhuman. And that was why Hermione brewed as much as she could each month. Each vial truly made a difference. Unlike the fake laws, pretend tolerance, and false smiles for the media they tried to control, brewing was the real solution. And the real work. It had never been her favorite thing to do, but it was the right thing and something she excelled at. Hermione would do more if she could, but Padma's patients, who consisted of newly bitten long-term werewolves and defects from the Greyback side, were appreciative all the same. They weren't answering the call of the Death Eaters who promised a better life under their regime, and with the potion, they were able to work and live normally as part of society. which was all that mattered. "The full moon is tomorrow," Padma said, giving her a long look before she worked to prepare for her next group, waving her wand to neutralize the scent of other wolves from the air. They were especially sensitive in the days before the full moon. "Do you want someone to stay?" Hermione counted the leftovers. She usually made 40. Today there were 30 left, and Padma had 2 more group sessions of no more than 6 wolves in each, which was right around the normal. "I'll be home by moonrise. Besides, my wards are strong." "I know all of that, but if you want company, I can stay." Then her brown eyes lit up. "You can help me pick flowers for the wedding." She could think of an entire list of things she wanted to do more. Hermione chuckled at Padma's rare show of blatant enthusiasm. "I have a vegetable garden and a working knowledge of flowers as they pertain to pollinating, but I am no expert outside of what's aesthetically pleasing." "I know, but Neville is busy with his students. Pavarti has wild ideas, and Cho will be busy." "And Blaise? He's your fiancé, after all." Padma gave her a long look. "Blaise Sabini? Picking floral arrangements? Willingly?" She started laughing, and unable to stop herself, Hermione joined in. She had a point. The mental image of a bewildered Blaise deciding between lilacs, amaryllis, and carnations was hilarious. "But he's been threatening elopement so often, I feel this would drive him over the edge." Hermione snorted. "Fear of your grandmother will keep him in line." "She has a bat bogey hex that makes Ginny's looks amateurish." They both laughed and returned to their tasks, dropping into silence to focus on what they were doing. But soon Hermione disrupted it. "Are you coming tonight?" Every other Friday they gathered at her house, witches only. "Yes, Pavarti too." Then she remembered. "Oh, is it okay if I bring Cho?" Hermione didn't feel one way or the other about Cho Chang, but she was Padma's best friend and was slowly becoming a regular at their events, much to Pansy's annoyance. "That's fine." Susan popped her head into the room, looking harried, yet perfectly composed. "Oh, Hermione, you're here. Great. I know you're not floating this week, but I need some help with a patient." Before either could ask, she continued. "Orin Task Force versus Death Eaters in a skirmish in Chesterfield. 1 dead, 1 missing, 2 critical, and 6 injured." There was a pause. Then they both sprang into action, but Padma stopped herself. "I have a group session in 15 minutes." Hermione summoned her trusty beaded bag. "I can't leave a room full of werewolves together the night before a full moon for any length of time." No, she absolutely could not. A fight would likely break out. Padma unclipped her potions holster and put it around Hermione's waist before she turned to Susan. "Any wolf bites?" "No." Hermione and Padma exchanged equally relieved looks. Greyback hadn't been set free. Yet. While not the full moon, there was always an alarming rise in the number of people bitten either just before or after, almost as if it were on purpose. Hermione pulled out her vial of Dittany. "Is Harry out there?" "No, he wasn't there, but I suppose he'll be around soon, along with Malfoy. The fatality was a task force member." She paused in her efforts to find all of the potions she carried in her bag. "Killing curse?" "Yes, and the most critical is a dagger wound laced with poison, the same one you cured Molly Weasley from." Hermione's eyes widened, then doubled her efforts, snatching her wand while on the move. She barely said goodbye to Padma before hurrying out with Susan, who walked as she talked. "It's been 30 minutes since he was stabbed. I called someone from plant poisoning up to assist." Good move, but that was to be expected. Susan was an excellent planner. "They brought the blade in case it's not the poison they've been using. Do you have the antidote?" Hermione handed Susan her bag, while she put her hair up into a messy bun. "1 vial, but there's more in my office, if you don't mind." "Of course. Anything else I need to know?" "He's young." Very young, as it turned out. Barely out of Hogwarts and not so trained. It was yet another story of the life of an underfunded Auror's office and task force team. He was tall, broad, blonde, and close to death. Hermione couldn't tell which posed more of a threat, the dagger wound or the poison. That was about as far as she got when she shed her sweater, so she wouldn't ruin another one with blood, and got to work. Hermione, who didn't wear a uniform or a badge, had no time for names or introductions. The other Aurors in the room must have recognized her from both her own fame and her lunch visits with Harry, because no one stopped her. Also likely because the injured wizard was frothing at the mouth, bleeding from a chest wound, and hallucinating about a dead relative. The poison had a firm grip. It took 2 uninjured Aurors and a Mediwitch, and Hermione literally sitting on his legs to hold him down long enough for Susan, who had returned just in time, to get the first round of antidote down his throat. Then something for pain, then blood replenishing, then dreamless sleep. He would need it. It wasn't long before she had his bloody robes torn open and blood on her gloved hands. Susan followed her every move, making expert seals with her wand as Hermione carefully dripped dittany into the wound, closing as much of it as she could. They worked in silence, so familiar with each other that Hermione knew what Susan would do and what she needed long before she could utter a request, and vice versa. Hermione felt the cooling sensation tingle her skin, vanishing the sweat from her brow. "Thanks. Any time." Susan returned to her task, remaining silent until the gashes were closed. He would have a scar, but he wouldn't die from the wound. The poison, on the other hand, it was too soon to tell. "I'll run a few diagnostic charms for any internal damage." Hermione stood back while she worked, removing her gloves and using her wand to cleanse the patient's body of blood and dirt. Susan finished her charms and reached for the enchanted parchment with the results. She winced, but if Hermione knew anything about the witch, it was that Susan wasn't as much of a pessimist as she should have been, given all the other relatives she'd lost to Voldemort. "The poison's pretty advanced, but the dagger missed everything vital. If we can keep him stable through the 12 antidote rounds, he should live." A brunette midi-witch peeked in and looked at Hermione. "Harry Potter would like a status update on this patient." "Critical, but stable." The witch turned her attention to Susan. "Both Harry and the task force leader would like to speak to you about the deceased task force member. They need to inform his family." Task force leader? That seemed to be a very odd way to address Draco Malfoy, given the informal way she had addressed Harry. Susan placed the charm parchment on the table and sighed. "Right, of course." The excitement of their success with one patient quickly turned into a reminder of a failure and loss of life. There was nothing she could have done, but still, it never got easier. When she passed, Hermione rested a stable hand on her shoulder, giving her a look that conveyed her concern. Susan nodded in return. "See you tonight, yeah?" The witch appeared to think about it. "Whose turn is it to bartend? If it's Pansy, hell no. She's heavy-handed, and I like to not be miserable for the next week." Hermione burst out laughing, tossing her head back. She had a point. "No, it's Ginny's turn." It showed every bit of her weariness from an obviously long day, but Susan smirked. "I'll be late, but I'll be there." Ginny had 3 kids under the age of 7, so in essence, she had 3 jobs. Her first was mum, wife, short-order cook, and peacekeeper. The 4 positions were intertwined and paid exactly the same, absolutely nothing. Her second was Quidditch reporter. That paid exceedingly well. And her last, but second most important job, was barmaid. And like an excellent barmaid, Ginny had a stiff and suspiciously fruity drink waiting for Hermione when she popped home after leaving the unexpected and full day of patience and charting at St. Mungo's. "Oh, thank goodness!" Without uttering a greeting, she drank it in 3 gulps, noting with a little fear in her heart that the liquor hadn't burned like it should, which didn't bode well for the rest of her evening, or her morning tomorrow. She hadn't brewed any hangover potion in months. But that didn't stop Hermione from placing the empty glass down and nodding for another. It was their Friday night ritual, one that had begun out of necessity for Ginny, who needed a few hours away from her kids for the sake of her sanity. Harry kept them on Friday nights, and she kept them on Saturdays when he wanted to go out with his mates. Over the years, their ritual had grown, expanded. Now it included a few extra people, like Luna, when she wasn't traveling the world for work, Daphne, Padma, Susan, and Parvati, when they weren't busy, and Pansy, but only when she promised to play nice with her latest addition, Cho. Pansy didn't come often. That bad? Hermione sat on the bar stool, placing her elbows on the white granite, head bowed in her hands. "I went to drop off Wolfsbane and ended up helping out after the ambush." "Ah, Harry told me about that. 1 dead and 1 missing. Stan Mathers? He was just getting home from breaking the news to his parents when I was preparing to come here. He said you saved a young Auror who got stabbed with a poisoned dagger." She nodded. "Same potion as the one that damaged your mom's hands. They've managed to fuse it into the blade itself. Nasty bit of magic. Unnatural. He almost died." Hermione frowned. "Susan said Malfoy took it to the Department of Mysteries for them to run tests on it. I was too busy saving the Auror's life." A thought passed. "I don't even remember his name." "Alan Cottleback." When Hermione eyed her, Ginny shrugged, her answer the same for everything that concerned Auror business. "Harry told me. Also told me to say thank you." "I was doing my job." "On your holiday." Hermione shrugged and accepted the drink Ginny offered. "Did you miss the dinner with your parents?" It was a brave question. Ginny knew exactly how little Hermione wanted to discuss her parents. And yet, she brought them up whenever the opportunity arose. Internally grimacing, Hermione swallowed her drink down in quick, burning gulps without uttering a response. Now her best friend was more concerned. Hermione, despite having a bar under her island, had never been a heavy drinker. It was a matter of control, obviously, that kept her from indulging outside the single glass of wine she allowed herself per day. Tonight, though, she needed the reprieve. "I didn't," she confessed with a sigh. "We had dinner night before last, but it didn't go very well either." "So, like normal, then." Ginny reached across the bar and patted her on the top of her lowered head in a dry, compassionate sort of way that made Hermione chuckle, despite how she felt. Hermione launched into a run-through of the visit overall, spending extra time on the conversation with her mum that had stayed with her since tea, and the excuse she made to leave before dessert. She played it on repeat in her mind like a scratched record. By the time she finished, Ginny's face had twisted into a cringe and her cheeks were pinker than they had been. "You definitely need another." Then she dipped out of sight behind the island and re-emerged with a fresh bottle of Ogden's. She walked to Hermione's vintage refrigerator and returned with several small containers of freshly squeezed juices, an ice tray, and maraschino cherries before beginning her complicated mixing process that Hermione watched, but could never ever comprehend. Having learned Molly's love for cooking over the years, Ginny was at home in any kitchen and spent enough time inside them to know what Hermione might need, which was why she'd helped with the layout and didn't say much whenever she rearranged everything during moments of stress. Everything from the stone flag flooring, white walls, ceiling lights, island's granite that didn't match the treated wood on the rest of the countertops, and distressed wood beams that ran into the sitting room was all Ginny's idea. Hermione couldn't even take the credit for the sage green cabinets, the open shelves mixed with cabinets that ran along the wall where the stove was, or the location of the butler's sink beneath the window that overlooked her garden and the land beyond, as that had been Pansy's doing. The only thing she could say that was all her own idea was the fact that the windowsill was lined with the pots of her regularly used herbs. Honestly, it didn't matter. The space suited Hermione, which was great because when she wasn't brewing potions, working through her infinite reading list, working with her patients, or gardening, she was cooking. After a few small fires and failures, she'd found a new hobby. On to a different topic. Hermione rested her elbow on the table and plunked her chin in her hand. "How was your day?" Ginny's answer was a sarcastic glance, followed by an amused chuckle. "Let's just say I'm happy it's Friday. Before I left, Lily bit James because he kept putting his hands in her face after she told him to stop. Al still hates nursery school and is already upset about returning on Monday, but no tears, just pouting. All in all, there were a lot of tears and hurt feelings happening at my house right now." She grinned. "Harry's thriving. Or crying with them. Fun times." Her mouth quirked into a fond smile that told Hermione that, chaos and all, Ginny wouldn't have it any other way. "Yes, it is." After shaking everything in the ice-filled tumbler one last time, she flashed a smile that instantly told Hermione that the redhead wanted something. "Any plans tomorrow?" "No." She already knew why Ginny was asking. "I'll probably spend the day gardening with Al." "Thanks," she grinned in response. "I'll bring him by in the morning." Truthfully, they didn't need to ask, but every other week one of them would, and Hermione let them. At 5, Albus was the shyest of the 3 Potter kids, scared of anything too large, and had a tendency to melt into the background when mixed in with his more boisterous, chaos-inspiring siblings, and cousins. Even though he was anxious to the point of tears around strange adults, in small, controlled environments, Al thrived. Harry and Ginny had realized, after daily tantrums and tears, that the sensory overload of his siblings exhausted him. So they asked her to keep him every other Saturday, just so he could get away, while they worked at home to give him the peace he needed between visits. He seemed happier during his visits, more inclined to talk, laugh, joke, and ask an array of random questions while he played with the chickens or helped pull weeds. Al was an excellent weed puller. He enjoyed the quiet of the open pasture behind her gate, and the walks they took on sunny days, each time venturing further from the house and closer to the forest he feared. One day they would make it. One day he would make it to the edge of the forest and realize there was nothing to fear. Hermione would be right there, holding his hand when he decided to take his first steps in, when he stopped being afraid. "Where's Luna?" Hermione asked. Ginny poured the mixture into the glass and pushed it towards her. "Argentina." "I thought she was supposed to return today." "She had an issue with her port key, so she'll be back tomorrow." "Ah," Hermione nodded. "And everyone else? Susan already told me she would be late." "Parvati should be here soon. Padma's running late because she's narrowing down wedding venues with Blaze. She's bringing Cho. Pansy is upstairs deciding if she's going to be a bitch or not while measuring your clawfoot tub." "She found one?" "Yes, she did," Pansy announced from the bottom of the stairs across the sitting room. The room was open to the kitchen, giving her the perfect sight of the drink in Hermione's hand. She gasped dramatically. "You chit started without me?" Ginny rolled her eyes so hard her head went up in motion. "Oh, for fuck's sake." She picked up the metallic shaker, gave it a shake. The sound of ice hitting the metal rang in the quiet room. Then she poured a second glass as Pansy sat on the bar stool next to Hermione. "Why do we tolerate you?" "Call it a matter of good taste." Ginny narrowed her eyes. "There's a compliment in there somewhere." The true answer to Ginny's question was simple in its complexity. She'd given Pansy a chance. Not as an act of compassion or forgiveness, but rather as a favor to Theo that she almost declined simply because Hermione had never liked Pansy. But they were adults, and she understood that even bullies were humans with the capacity to grow the hell up and become better people for it. But she'd never included Pansy in that thought before because, at the time, she hadn't spared the witch a single thought in years. Not since she'd shouted for someone to grab Harry so he could be offered to the Voldemort to spare them all. While he'd ended up doing just that, Hermione had principles and a strong sense of justice. But it wasn't stronger than her desire to help someone obviously in need, and Pansy had been in need. The first time Hermione had seen Pansy since war was in St. Mungo's when Theo had called her into his office to examine the battered witch. He'd waited outside. With the clothes off her back, she'd left her arranged marriage to a German wizard from a powerful wizarding family, and was subsequently burned off her family tree, and financially cut off. The black eye, busted lip, and bruises had come from being hexed by her mother. When Hermione had tried to heal her, Pansy had laughed and said, "No, thank you. I'd like to wear them as a crown. I'm finally the ruler of my own destiny." The remark had stayed with Hermione for weeks. Months later, when she'd casually mentioned to Theo that she was preparing to finally start designing her house, he'd asked her to hire Pansy, just to give her purpose, focus, and a chance. Pansy had no experience outside of decorating Theo's office, a nasty attitude that was likely a defense mechanism, and she was almost as stubborn as Hermione. But she thought about their initial meeting, the words that had been laced with a strong desire to better herself, and a time not too long before that, when Hermione had needed purpose as well. So she had agreed to pay her to design one room, the kitchen. The project had been grueling for them both, due to their massive personality and style clash, but they'd found common ground over the sage green paint, ultimately used on Hermione's cabinets. It tentatively grew from there. Pansy talked about her miserable life under the thumb of her ex-husband's family, while Hermione listened and shared bits of her own struggles, the reason behind her departure from the ministry, and why she'd become a healer. The more Pansy learned about her, the more she stopped making bold, grandiose suggestions, instead switching to favor more those in line with Hermione's simple style. When the project was completed, she caught Pansy blinking back tears of accomplishment, proud of herself for her own capabilities, and like Neville had done when she'd grown her first batch of oblong tomatoes, Hermione rested her head on her shoulder and paid it forward by not judging her. Letting her cry while not speaking a word about it, only celebrating how far she'd come, and how far she would go. Not long after, Hermione suggested Pansy to Hannah Abbott, who had just taken over the leaky cauldron and was in need of updating. She'd agreed, and the business Pansy hadn't planned on having exploded. But despite her busy schedule, she'd kept Hermione's house a priority as they slowly worked, and argued, from room to room, turning her cottage into a home. "Who all is coming? And you better not say Cho fucking Chang." They remained comically silent. "Fuck, I'm leaving." "I'm certain you can tolerate her for a few hours." The doubtful glare Ginny received made Hermione wheeze out a laugh. "I can tolerate a lot of things. The both of you, for starters." "Touché," Ginny grinned. Instead of heading towards the flue, Pansy approached them, rolling her eyes. "Padma is marrying one of my closest friends, and Parvati is hilarious. Susan is tolerable, I suppose. I don't know her well enough except to say that, for a Hufflepuff, she has a glorious resting bitch face. Granger and I signed that armistice, and I suppose, Weasley, you've got a certain charm and a talent for hexes that the recovering bitch in me can respect. However, I draw the bloody line at Cho." "Recovering?" Hermione cocked a brow, which earned her a scowl. She just grinned back. Meanwhile, Ginny pulled out another glass from below and poured her remainder of her shaker into the glass. Ignoring most of Pansy's arguments, she scoffed. "I've been married to Harry for 10 years. Are you going to call me Weasley forever?" "Basically." Pansy brought the rim of her glass to her lips, drinking slowly. "Oh, and I've just been reminded of why. You make excellent drinks." "Parenthood has taught me well." Ginny dramatically curtsied, and they all laughed. "How was dinner with your parents?" Pansy arched an eyebrow. It was a topic they had discussed while breaking down the barriers between them. When Hermione sighed, she and Ginny exchanged pointed looks. Pansy pursed her lips and exhaled. Even though she wasn't the comforting type, not in the least, she managed an awkward pat on Hermione's head. "Looks like I'm staying after all." Hermione felt good. Better than good. She felt absolutely splendid. Thanks to a few of Ginny's feel-good concoctions of excellence, both the day and the conversation with her mother were all but a distant memory. Oh, she had no doubt it would return at a later time and place, but she would be better equipped to deal with it then. Not now, when she was splayed on the sofa, body warmed and pliant from alcohol, and her legs stretched out until they reached the empty spot Pansy had just vacated to make them both another drink. Something was different because Ginny had decided it would be an excellent idea for her to catch up with Hermione, and did just that by knocking back 3 of her mystery drinks rapidly just after the others had arrived. Now she looked as regret-free and happy as Hermione felt, and she smiled lazily at her friend who was currently lost in her own world. Ginny's hips swayed to the soft music coming from the wireless as she waved her arms, eyes closed. Her red hair was freed from its ponytail, moving with her easy shimmies. Susan, who was already pissed and asleep on the floor, was closer than she knew to being precariously stepped on by the dancing witch. Oh well. A slightly flushed Pansy returned with her third and Hermione's. Well, she'd lost count. However, upon first taste, it didn't seem as strong as the others. It had a bit of a bite, though. "It's straight fire whiskey because I couldn't be bothered to make fancy drinks for someone as smashed as you are, love." Her term of endearment alerted Hermione to the state of Pansy's sobriety, or lack thereof. When Pansy attempted to elegantly sit down, she missed her landing and lost a bit of her drink to her hands, which made her glare. "Damn you, gravity! You fickle bitch!" Laughter rang out from Padma and Cho, who were on the 2-seater talking about Padma's wedding plans, a common topic at their gathering since she'd gotten engaged to Blaise Zabini at Christmas. She didn't mind. In fact, she was looking forward to their wedding next year in India. Their inebriated giggles were drowned out by Parvati's. She was a bit of a lightweight, and nearly bombed after only one of Ginny's mixes, which made her tongue loose and her voice louder than usual. She sat on Hermione's coffee table in black leggings and a bright pink shirt, while facing her sister and close friend, legs folded with her still unfinished first drink in her hand. Conversation continued after their laughter subsided. Hermione listened, quiet and smiling, not catching every joke or sentence because the alcohol had loosened her to the point where she didn't care that Parvati had been sitting on her sled coffee table that looked as if the wood was held together by metal. A table that she and Pansy had argued about for 2 weeks because even though it didn't fit with the country modern theme of the space, Hermione loved it. Ginny was bopping along in the corner when Cho asked, "How many guests have you and Blaise decided on?" Padma, who wore her black hair wavy and down as of late, took a long drink and made a look that spoke a little to how overwhelmed she had been about the overall process, a sentiment she'd expressed to Hermione during their last lunch together. "It'll be at least 100 people from my side and my parents' entire village." "Loads of family," Parvati blurted out, extending an arm as if it would quantify the number of guests. "I'm planning on not being single by then. Merlin, if I hear—" Her face changed as she mocked one of her numerous relatives. "When are you going to find a good man to marry?" "One more time, I am going to launch myself at the sun." While Parvati commiserated on single life, Pansy gave her an insincere air pat with one hand and sipped her drink with the other. "There, there," she drawled like some aristocrat. The fire whiskey dulled Hermione's ability to suppress anything she found remotely funny, so she barked out a loud laugh, then blushed and apologized. Parvati glared at her, but there was no heat in it, especially when she realized something quite important. "You'll need to find a date too, Hermione. Good luck with that, mate. Your standards are far higher than mine." "And your standards aren't, Parvati?" Cho asked innocently, but there was mischief in her eyes. Susan rolled over onto her back and started snoring, loudly. Bless. I'll settle for breathing and reasonably decent hygiene. I don't ask for much. Pansy rolled her eyes and Cho agreed. Padma, too. Lies! Ginny yelled over the wireless, but kept dancing like she hadn't said a thing. And while Parvati pouted, everyone laughed because they were familiar with her song and dance. Regardless of what she said, Parvati had standards, and they were not low. In fact, they were probably higher than Hermione's, in a way. She'd never had a steady boyfriend, only a long string of casual flings that ultimately hadn't turned into anything more permanent. The reason why had been solely because she fancied unattainable men, whether physically, emotionally, or both. And when they began to show interest and talk of something more, when they began to chase her rather than the other way around, well, her interest in them practically vanished. Hermione was familiar with the thrill of the hunt, of chasing something she wanted until she caught it, but she'd never known someone to win a race, collect their trophy, look at it, and then toss it in the rubbish quite like Parvati. Over the years, she'd wondered if Parvati had even wanted those unattainable men in the first place, or if she merely liked the idea of them just being out of their reach. But now that she was sauced, and overthinking every little thing, Hermione found herself sipping her fire whiskey and contemplating the idea that perhaps Parvati didn't know what she wanted. Or maybe she did, and she was too scared of the additional stress and responsibilities that came along with twinning her life with someone else's. Hermione secretly could relate. Padma had done it so easily in the last 6 years she'd been with Blaise that Hermione seriously considered flat out asking her just how she'd built something out of nothing. It couldn't have been easy considering the fact that they had so much against them, right from the start. Yet they fought each battle again and again with a better strategy and a growing resilience. There were so many people that doubted they would make it 1 month, much less a year. Or 6. Hermione quietly confessed that she had been a doubter. They were such a bizarre pair right from the start, both cagey about the details that had led to their coming together. Alcohol, if she had to guess. Hermione liked when things made sense, when they were analyzable, and when they were neither. Padma wasn't as electric as her sister, not nearly as bold or outgoing. She knew how to have fun, but was a bit uptight. Like Hermione, she preferred a good book or a foreign film over going out. They shared a love for hard work and a passion for helping people. Blaise was... well, he was the sort of person people paid attention to because he never did anything that was expected of him. He was extremely laid back, charismatic, and open with what didn't matter, but private about what did. In fact, no one had any idea they were even dating until some unfortunate soul tried to accost Padma during one of their group outings. She was still trying to calculate how he'd gone from sitting next to Theo to punching some drunken wizard in the face. They'd all been thrown out of the bar in the process. Apparition had been ruled out because his wand was still on the table. Nevertheless, that had been how everyone found out, and also how they all learned that neither of their families approved of the match. Padma's family didn't approve because he wasn't Indian, traditional, or interested in having a large family, something Padma wasn't interested in either. Hermione had expected Blaise's mother to disapprove because of Padma's blood status, but was surprised to learn that it actually stemmed from the simple fact that she wasn't rich. Interesting. But it seemed that the more their families tried to tear them apart, the tighter they held on to the other. They outlasted their disapproval and became stronger for it, indomitable. Padma had simply blossomed with Blaise at her side, becoming a more confident version of herself, certain of her worth in every part of her life. She supported his career that kept him away at times, and he celebrated each of her successes. On the occasions when she failed, he was still there supporting her, encouraging her, cheering her on in that subtle way of his. Hermione sipped her drink and considered the possibility that she'd have been wrong about them. Perhaps they made sense after all. Who did Blaise pick as his groomsman? Pansy rolled her eyes at Parvati, who was finishing her first drink and moaning pitifully to herself about her single life. Ginny was doing a strange version of the robot. The music was all wrong for her dance moves, but Hermione tilted her glass at her friend and supported her life choices. Like a good friend. She hiccuped. Susan rolled over onto her side. Her snores were louder than the music. A silencing charm would do, but Hermione had no idea where her wand was, probably for the best. Pansy gave her a look out of the corner of her eye, which made her grin, with all of her teeth. "Oh, good gods, Hermione, stop smiling," Parvati exclaimed. "You look like you've trapped a bug." There was another riotous round of laughter that she joined in on. Ginny, sometime during the fit of giggles, drifted over and flopped down next to Hermione on the sofa. She'd barely had it time to move her legs. "Who did he choose?" Ginny asked with a bit of a slur. her cheeks bright red with both exertion from her dancing and from her drinks. Padma, who had long since kicked off her shoes, tucked her feet alongside her while leaning on Cho, pliant and happy. Theo and Draco. Meanwhile, her choices for bridesmaids had been obvious: Parvati and Cho. Hermione would be attending happily as a guest. Besides, Harry and Ginny's chaotic affair had made her seriously question if she wanted her ceremony at all, should she ever find someone, or muster the energy to look, for that matter. At Blaze's choices, Parvati lifted her head, a gleam in her dark eyes. He picked Draco? Excellent! Cho tilted her head in curiosity. I'm confused. There wasn't a slur in her words. She was the most sober person in the room, as she didn't drink, one of the many reasons Pansy couldn't stand her. Just how buckled are you? Yes. Ginny almost choked while Parvati smiled at the inside of her cup before cackling with glee. This is fantastic news. Why are you so excited about this? Cho asked. Draco Malfoy is a massive... She cut her eyes in Pansy's direction and blushed at her misstep. She was talking about a friend of Pansy's who they all knew she was extremely protective over. The witch didn't care, shrugging at her efforts at being tactful while completing her sentence. Wanker, prat, arse, I've called Draco almost every version of the word I know at some point in our lives. Or in the last month. Or week. Pansy cut her eyes at Parvati. The question remains, why are you so excited? Which seemed to be the question of the hour, judging by the look on everyone's face. Parvati glanced around at each of them, more and more aghast by their lack of understanding. Draco Malfoy will be wearing traditional Indian groomsmen robes. She spoke slowly, like they were missing the point, and Hermione probably was, because nothing the witch said made sense. He'll be wearing Indian robes, Padma chuckled knowingly, some twin thing Hermione never understood. The rest of them were still lost. Indian robes! I'm so lost right now, Cho said softly, more to Padma than anyone, but they all heard her anyway. Hermione found herself giggling because the witch's confusion was so loud she almost looked regretful for asking the question that had brought her to that point. Indian robes! Parvati emphasized each word with a sharp, cutting motion of her free hand. Yes, 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 we get it, Pansy huffed. Get to the point, for fuck's sake. Are you all fucking kidding me right now? She looked at them all like she was the smartest person in the room. Hermione had evidence to prove otherwise. The man is bloody gorgeous. Parvati brought her hand to her chin, pursing her lips in reflection as she added an addendum to her statement. Well, not accounting for his personality, of course. Cho's face was all scrunched up. That's a pretty large thing to not account for. She glanced over at Pansy, who nodded her approval, then said, He's an arse. Ignoring her, Parvati pushed her braid off of her shoulder. Fair. That's incredibly fair. Witch Weekly asked me to interview the top 10 Wizarding World bachelors last week, and Malfoy ranked number 1. For a morbid reason, Hermione grimaced. His mom had to force him to attend the interview, but bloody hell is he fit! Have you not seen him? Ginny and Cho exchanged shrugs. They hadn't. Padma and Pansy obviously had. As the only person who didn't answer, Hermione suddenly found all eyes on her. Parvati looked expectant. She scratched her eyebrow before awkwardly replying, no, haven't seen him in years, actually, since his trial. Just how the hell have you managed that, Hermione? Parvati scoffed. You have lunch with Harry and they work together. I just haven't. It's not like they're chummy. I imagine they schedule their loo breaks to avoid seeing each other for a second longer than they have to. The room erupted in laughter, despite Hermione being deadly serious about her statement. She just shrugged and started to take another sip of fire whiskey when Ginny made a slow grab that she'd seen coming a kilometer away. Ginny's success at stealing it could be completely blamed on Hermione's poor motor control, and the fact that the room had a nice hazy glow to it. The joke ended up being on Ginny when she took the first sip and blanched at the taste, looking as if she'd swallowed molten lava. She turned wide eyes on Hermione. How are you drinking this straight? Her shrug was lazy at best. It's spicy? She's blitzed, Pansy cut in. Hermione started to argue, but lost both the words and the will. Next time, she vowed while nodding at nothing. Then she chuckled at herself and leaned forward, which was actually to the side because her head was touching Ginny's shoulder. Ah, definitely smashed then. Marvelous. Parvati brought the focus back on herself. Of course she is, but that doesn't matter because Draco Malfoy will be wearing traditional Indian robes, and I appear to be the only one who recognizes it for the gloriousness that it is. Dramatically, she pointed at them all. I am ashamed of all of you. I, for one, don't see him that way because I've known him all his life, Pansy pointed out with a lazy wave of her hand and a sip of her drink. She crossed her legs and leaned back on the sofa. Also, Pansy grimaced, been there, tried to do that 5th year, and that was a terrible mistake we agreed never to speak of again. Then she got up, plucked her glass from Ginny's hand, and wobbled into the kitchen to pour more fire whiskey. Hermione smiled in excitement. Parvati looked up, appearing to deeply contemplate her point. You know what? I'll allow that. He was still pointy then. Now, however, I'd give part of my salary for the opportunity to climb him like a tree. Ginny made a high-pitched noise. Her lips pursed and eyes squinted. Pretty certain that's called prostitution. It's a bit illegal, Hermione needlessly pointed out. A bit? Cho and Padma said simultaneously. Then they broke out in light giggles, and the rest of them joined in quickly. Susan continued snoring. Parvati, meanwhile, was glaring at them all, but none of them were threatened by her looks because she was too busy trying not to smile. Okay, poor choice in words, but the fact remains, he's still a bit pointy, gorgeous, and, well, according to the rumors, he has started to date again. After, you know. And they did. The witch cringed at her own insensitivity, not because she felt particularly bad about her words. She would have said it regardless, but rather because Pansy was there. She hadn't been Astoria's friend, but she was Daphne's, and she was well within earshot. But when the witch returned less than a minute later, she handed Ginny her glass and ignored the way Hermione sulked at being cut off before she coolly leveled Parvati with a look. Don't stop on my account. She sat down and sipped her fire whiskey before she continued on. Seriously, it doesn't offend me because it's a fact. Draco is widowed, and we all knew it was coming after his son's birth. It wasn't a surprise. The surprise was how long Astoria lasted. Ginny refused to share her drink, no matter how much Hermione pouted. His mother is planning to use this season to find him a wife. After running a hand over her still perfect hair, she gave a very matter-of-fact shrug. Purebloods who are widowed as early as he has been don't typically wait long to remarry, especially when they have young children. It's a witch's duty to raise the children, regardless if they are hers or not. When Padma rested her head on Cho's shoulder, she took to carefully pushing her hair out of her face, frowning when she said, Seems cold. Pansy shrugged with an indifference that came from growing up in that world. We all know that we'll never marry for love unless we're okay with living without a family. Well, she offered the now nodding future Mrs. Zabini a meaningful look. The Zabinis aren't traditional in any sense of the word, so they don't count. The Greengrass family aren't as traditional either, but they didn't forgive Daphne for running off and marrying Dean until Astoria died. In fact, they still act like he doesn't exist, even though they're about to have a baby. My family was far stricter. Ginny, who had been as quiet and thoughtful as Parvati, spoke up. Do you regret leaving? Hermione's eyes were suddenly too heavy to keep open, so she allowed her head to rest on the back cushion. The room swayed as if she were on a boat in the middle of the ocean, even though her eyes were shut. Still, when Pansy answered, Hermione heard it loud and clear in the haze of her intoxicated mind. I only regret not leaving sooner. And because she was always so bloody maudlin whenever she drank fire whiskey, the last thing Hermione heard her say before she drifted asleep was, I'll never be able to repay Theo, or even fire whiskey-scoped Granger over here, for how they helped me figure myself out after, but I'll never forget it either. If you can't pay it back, pay it forward. Catherine Ryan Hyde.